Epilogue. Shonda. Shonda stared down at the ring on her finger and sighed. Deacon had definitely outdone himself with the proposal. He'd asked his friends at the fire station to watch Dante, and then filled the house with flower petals, leading to a romantic dinner he'd cooked. To say it had been perfect was an understatement. She looked back up at herself in the mirror, still unable to believe this was finally happening. It was everything she had hoped for 8 years ago, and the only thing that would have made it better would have been if her parents could have been here. But she knew they were watching down on this moment and rejoicing. "You look amazing," Yolanda said, appearing behind her in the mirror. Yolanda had become her closest friend here in Fire Beach, and it was only natural that she should also be her maid of honor. In addition, Shonda had asked Cassidy and Ivy, partly because they were such a big part of Deacon's life, and partly because they'd been so kind and helpful when it came to watching Dante when those needs arose. Her list of friends was still pretty small, but she was looking forward to seeing it grow as she spent more time here. "Thank you for helping me find a dress on such short notice," Shonda said, turning to embrace her friend. When Yolanda had seen the ring on Shonda's finger, she'd done 3 things. First, she'd squealed in excitement. Second, she'd demanded the whole story. And third, she'd explained that her sister owned a bridal shop and she would have the perfect dress for Shonda. Though she'd been sure she would never be able to afford it, Yolanda's sister's boutique had contained the perfect dress, and it had been on sale. Yolanda rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Girl, you should have known I would not let you get married in anything but the best. But I'm certainly glad Candida was able to help you." The door opened then, and Cassidy stuck her head in. Shonda had asked her and Ivy to make sure everything was remaining on time and as planned. "If you're ready, the rest of the church is as well." Shonda took a deep breath and nodded. This was it. The moment she'd thought would happen nearly a decade ago. "Is Dante ready too?" Cassidy smiled and nodded. "Yep, Luca's been watching him. He looks very dapper, like a regular young gentleman." Shonda had no doubt. Yolanda's sister had taken care of getting him a little suit as well. "Okay, then I guess I'm ready." She handed Cassidy and Ivy their bouquets, checked her appearance one more time in the mirror, and then followed the women down the hall to the sanctuary. She'd only been attending this church with Deacon for the last month or so, but it felt like home, and she couldn't imagine getting married anywhere else. Bubba, Luca, and Jordan waited outside the doors with Dante, but he broke ranks as soon as he saw her. "Wow, Mom, you look so pretty," he said, giving her a hug. He pulled back, grinned up at her, and patted his pocket. "I've been doing a great job keeping the ring safe. You be proud of me." "I'm sure you have been, and I'm very proud of you." He'd refused to carry the normal pillow. Shonda couldn't really blame him, but he'd agreed to keep the rings in his pocket. "Everybody ready?" Jordan asked, opening the door a crack and peering inside. "Absolutely," Shonda said. Dante hurried back to the doors, and when Jordan opened them completely, he began his trek down the aisle. Jordan and Cassidy followed next, then Ivy and Bubba, and finally Yolanda and Luca. Shonda closed her eyes for a moment and thought about her parents. She wished her father were here to walk her down the aisle and that her mom had been here to help her plan everything. But though they weren't here physically, she felt their presence and tried to hold on to the last memory she had of hugging her father. Then the music changed and she was walking down the aisle. Though everything felt surreal, she couldn't help noticing the red flower petals sprinkled on the aisle, and it brought Deacon's proposal to mind. He'd arranged for Dante to hang out at the fire station for a few hours, and then he'd filled his house with rose petals, leading from the door to the kitchen. He'd set up a candlelit table and prepared her favorite meal, but he'd been waiting on bended knee as she entered. She'd had no idea how long he'd been in that position, but her heart had warmed at the sight. She felt a similar sensation now as she walked toward him. When she reached the altar, she passed her bouquet to Yolanda and took his hands. The pastor began speaking, but Shonda couldn't concentrate on his words. All she could focus on were the warm pools of chocolate that were Deacon's eyes. Somehow she managed to repeat the vows and say I do, and then the pastor was pronouncing them man and wife, and Deacon's lips were on hers. Joy like she'd never known shot through her, and then she and Deacon were hurrying back down the aisle and out the doors of the sanctuary. "I can't believe we made it," Shonda said. She'd been so sure that something would keep this wedding from happening, but they'd managed to make it all the way through the ceremony. "Me either," Deacon said, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her close. "But I'm certainly glad we did." He began to nuzzle her neck, and while she wanted to succumb to the feelings, there was still a reception to be held, and the rest of the people would be exiting the sanctuary soon. This was not the time or the place, but she was definitely looking forward to tonight and sharing a bed with Deacon instead of her son. The doors behind them opened, and Shonda expected to see the wedding party emerge. Instead, it was Jordan, his partner Al, and a few other detectives she didn't know well. All of them had lost their smiles and instead looked as if they'd been chiseled out of stone. Beside her, Deacon stiffened as he noticed them as well. "Jordan, is everything okay?" Jordan shook his head. "I hate to duck out on you, but we just got a call about a missing person." "Missing person?" Shonda asked. Jordan nodded and turned to her. "Evidently it's your boss, Dr. Garrett Young." "What? When?" He shook his head. "We don't know much, only that he didn't show up for work today and he's not answering his phone. But I'll contact you when I can. I'm sorry we have to run, but please don't let this ruin your day." Shonda knew he was right, but she felt so helpless doing nothing. "Hey," Deacon said, tugging on her hand to get her to look at him. "They've got this, and we've got a reception to attend. We can't do much to help physically, but we can pray for him, and we can do it without ceasing." Shonda nodded and smiled up at him. It might have taken 8 years longer than she'd planned, but there was no one she would rather have by her side than Deacon Jackson. She just hoped that praying would be enough. The end. Want to find out what's happened to Dr. Young? Be sure to pre-order In the Dark of Night. This has been In the Light of Day, a Men of Fire Beach romantic suspense, written by Lorana Hoops, copyright 2023, narrated by Lorana Hoops, audio copyright 2023.